For more than 3 centuries, the Romanovs ruled the vast empire of Russia, from the frozen forests of Siberia to the palaces of St. Petersburg. Known as the Tsar of all the Russias, many believed they reigned by divine right. And yet, in the year 1917, that divine line would come to a violent and final end. It began in splendor. Nicholas II inherited the throne in 1894, a man of quiet faith, gentle manners, and utter conviction that God had placed him upon the throne. But the world he ruled was changing faster than any autocrat could imagine. Factories thundered across Russia's cities. Millions of peasants left the land for industry, only to find poverty and hunger in its place. The empire was a patchwork of languages, faiths, and revolts, bound together by one fragile idea: loyalty to the Tsar. Nicholas saw compromise as weakness. Even as revolutions flared in Europe, he held firm. "I will maintain the principle of autocracy as firmly and unflinchingly as my father." But faith alone could not hold an empire together. Nicholas's wife, Alexandra Fyodorovna, was German by birth and deeply devout. She believed her husband ruled by the will of God, and that every hardship they faced was part of his divine plan. Together they had 4 daughters: Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, and one frail son, Alexei, heir to the Russian throne who suffered from hemophilia from birth, a bleeding disorder passed through royal bloodlines of Europe where a simple cut could be fatal. The secret of his illness was guarded fiercely. Within palace walls, the royal family lived in near seclusion, praying for the boy's survival as the empire outside creaked under its own weight. It was during this time of despair that gripped the royal household that a figure of shadow and scandal emerged: Grigory Rasputin, a wandering holy man from Siberia, who seemed able to ease the boy's pain when physicians could not. To Alexandra, he was a miracle sent by God. To the nobility, he was a devil sent to corrupt the throne. Whispers of Rasputin's debauchery and his scandalous behavior echoed through the halls of Petersburg. His growing influence over the Tsarina, and through her the government itself, alarmed the nobility and clergy alike. They believed he was destabilizing the government and threatening the Russian Empire, especially during World War I. They saw in him not a holy man, but a serpent coiled around the throne. While the Tsar commanded armies at the front, Rasputin's word carried weight within the palace walls, and the empire's faith in its rulers withered. In December 1916, a group of nobles, fearing he would bring ruin to Russia, lured him to the palace of Prince Felix Yusupov. There they poisoned him, shot him, beat him, and at last cast his body beneath the ice of the Neva River. The deed was meant to save the dynasty, but the rot had already set in. Russia's entry into the First World War was a catastrophe. Ill-equipped, poorly led, and undersupplied, the Russian army suffered millions of casualties. At home, food shortages, inflation, and despair spread like wildfire. By early 1917, the streets of Petrograd were filled with starving crowds demanding bread and peace. When soldiers sent to crush them joined the protest instead, Nicholas II's power simply evaporated. On March 15, 1917, the Tsar signed his abdication. After 304 years, the Romanov dynasty was no more. He believed he was stepping aside for the good of Russia. But in truth, he had just sealed his family's fate. At first, the provisional government kept the Romanovs under house arrest in the Alexandra Palace. They were treated respectfully, allowed servants, books, even walks in the garden. But as the Bolsheviks rose to power, the new leaders feared the royal family could become a symbol for counter-revolution. In August 1917, they were moved to Tobolsk in Siberia, then later to a modest merchant's house in Yekaterinburg, the Ipatiev House. Locals called it the House of Special Purpose. Here, the former Tsar, his wife, and their 5 children lived behind locked windows, watched by armed guards. They still prayed daily, convinced rescue would come from royalist forces advancing across Russia. But rescue never came. In the early hours of July 17, 1918, the family was woken by their captors. They were told they would be moved to safety because of approaching unrest. Instead, they were led to a small basement room. Nicholas carried Alexei in his arms. The girls followed, clutching their small religious icons. The guards arranged them for a photograph, or so they were told. Then the order was given. A sudden burst of gunfire echoed through the house. The smoke, the screams, the chaos. Within minutes, the Romanov family was gone. Their loyal servants lay beside them. It was not a royal execution. It was the deliberate erasure of a dynasty. Following their execution, the bodies were loaded onto trucks and driven into the forest outside Yekaterinburg. They were stripped, doused in acid and quicklime, and hidden in shallow graves. The Bolsheviks announced only that the Tsar has been executed. Of the family, they said nothing. Rumors spread quickly. Was Anastasia alive? Had Alexei been rescued? Across Europe and for years, imposters and hopeful claimants appeared, each claiming to be a surviving Romanov. For decades, no one knew the truth what happened that fateful day. The murder of the Romanovs symbolized more than the fall of a family. It was the death of imperial Russia itself. An empire of palaces, jewels, and divine right, replaced by a state built on ideology, steel, and fear. The red banners of revolution rose over a land once ruled by absolute faith. The Tsar's crown was replaced by the hammer and sickle, and the voice of the church silenced beneath that of the party. Decades later, when the empire that succeeded them finally crumbled, Russia turned once more to its past. In the year 2000, Nicholas II and his family were canonized by the Russian Orthodox Church, not as rulers, but as martyrs to history's relentless tide. For more than 70 years, the resting place of the Romanovs remained unknown. Then, in 1991, after the fall of the Soviet Union, investigators uncovered a shallow grave near Yekaterinburg. Inside were the remains of 9 people, later confirmed by DNA as Nicholas, Alexandra, and 3 of their daughters, along with their servants. The bodies of Alexei and one sister, long believed to be Anastasia, though DNA later identified her as Maria, were found in a second grave nearby in 2007. After nearly a century, the Romanovs were finally laid to rest in the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg, beside the rulers who had come before them. The Romanovs' end was more than a tragedy of royalty. It was the turning of an age. From gilded halls to a dark cellar floor, their story mirrors the collapse of an entire world, one where kings ruled by faith and empires were built on obedience. When the gunfire stopped in that basement in 1918, so too ended the world of divine kings. All that remained were ghosts, and the memory of a family who believed until the very last moment that God Himself would save them.